Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the scariest thing you've seen with your own eyes and no one else's? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Rogue wave on the Atlantic. Kinda weird to be 7 decks up on the bridge of an aircraft carrier looking at a wall of water. Drunk driver run over 2 women in an intersection. One went under a tire, the other rolled over the hood. The one who went under the tire later died that evening. The driver got 8 years in prison, 19 years old. My 90-year-old grandma lying at the bottom of the stairs with a broken arm and bloody head on Christmas morning. Never has my adrenaline been as high as it was that day. She made a full recovery and is still with us today. Absolute miracle that she made it. A close family member hanging from an extension cord by her neck in the doorway to my basement found her as I went to do laundry. She was visiting during a period of emotional distress that she'd hidden well. That, and seeing fear in my father's face for the first time when he was told his back pain was terminal cancer and that he'd be dead within 3 months. He adopted me, him and his wife, and was the strongest man I've ever known. It was shocking to see him scared. Poor mom lost my brother when he was 30 and dad when he was 50. She's so strong. My mother almost being killed at an armed robbery when I was 11 to 12 years old. The robbers actually pulled the trigger, but luckily the gun jammed. A coworker who bucked the company's safety rule by wearing his wedding ring on the production floor of a bottling plant, degloving his ring finger in the equipment. It was effing horrific. The flesh was just irretrievably gone, so we had to have it amputated. Seeing my wife of 12 years hanged on her neck in her mother's bathroom and having to get her off that place, trying to do CPR to her, only to get vomit since she was already dead. That shit brings me too many horrific memories to my mind, and it's been 8 years since. A car accident that should have killed me and my mother. A drunk driver took up both lanes of a country road and my mother hugged the side of the road to try to let him pass, but we hit a massive pothole at about 60 miles per hour, sending the car tumbling into a nearby field. I vividly remember that we flipped 4.5 times and that the second flip was the worst. My mom was knocked unconscious for about 3 to 5 minutes, and I was left in a car upside down in the middle of nowhere, thinking my mother was dead and I was trapped all alone. Worst moment of my life. We both made it out and received only minor injuries and some pretty serious concussions. Watching my father approach his death. He was dying from cancer, and as he got closer to dying, he suddenly became very frightened and was calling out for his mother in Italian. I'd never heard him speak Italian in my life. The fear and desperation in his voice was terrifying. It absolutely shattered my 15-year-old heart, and still at 43, I can't think about it without crying. My grandmother died last year. It wasn't the fact she was dying. I sat with her for several nights and held her hand and was glad to be there for her once it became clear she wasn't going to make it out this time. But the last time I saw her, despite being made as comfortable as possible, she had a moment of clarity where she was suddenly afraid. Not that she was going to die, which she had been welcoming for some time, but that an off-the-cuff remark she'd made to one of my cousins a week earlier might have been taken the wrong way and cause him to be upset with her. That, after spending more of the last 3 years of her life in a hospital than out, was going to be one of her final coherent thoughts, that she might have made one of her grandchildren even mildly unhappy. If she hadn't been drugged beyond any chance of mobility, I think she would have gone into full hysterics. It took my aunt and a nurse several minutes to calm her down, with the nurse honestly being the MVP, as she told my grandmother how lucky she was to have such a large family that had been coming to see her over the last few weeks, who were all happy and healthy and doing well in life, and they all loved her. It was one of the most agonizingly beautiful moments of my life. I'm tearing up thinking about it, but I hope I carry that memory with me forever. But it terrifies me that even hours from death, you can still carry that much fear inside you over something you regret and suddenly realize you will never be able to fix. If you read this, you might be wondering what she had said that she was worried about. My cousin had brought his girlfriend with him to the hospital, and she asked him in front of her if he thought she was the one. She was worried she might have embarrassed him. I worked at the only maximum security forensic mental hospital in Missouri for about 5 years. Saw some terrifying things. But the thing that haunts me to this day is the guy who bit my coworker's scrotum off. Whoa. I have a lot of questions. How did that happen? Where did his pants go? Like completely off? Oof. Whoa. I'm a firefighter and had to assist in cutting down a woman who hanged herself from an overpass. I was on the tip of the ladder off the truck and was maneuvered under her to cut the rope and secure her body. After I cut her down, we decided the best option was to move the ladder to a horizontal position as close to the ground as possible in order to pass her off to the coroner. The only problem was that she started to sink through the rungs. So, when we had the ladder was finally horizontal, someone had to crouch underneath her and push her body back through the rungs. From my perspective, I couldn't see the person underneath her, and for a brief second, my irrational brain thought she had come back to life and was climbing out of the ladder. Damn near shit my pants. My father cut his artery on the wrist after falling into a huge mirror from a ladder. I was like 10 and heard shouts and cries for help. I was already in shock, but the worst part was the huge amount of blood all over the kitchen, along with the walls and ceiling. Haunts me to this day. Waking up in the morning to my dad screaming my mom's name. I ran into their bedroom and tried to wake her and felt she was cold. I still had my dad help me get her onto the ground so I could do CPR. I tried to get my dad to call 911, but he was frozen, so I grabbed the phone and talked to the 911 guy while doing CPR. I went to give breaths to her, and blood started leaking out of her mouth. I knew at that point she was dead, but I still did CPR until the firemen showed up and pronounced her DOA. The paramedics showed up and literally walked inside and back out the front door in like 2 minutes. Coroner and police came next. The whole day felt like a year. Had family fly in from all over and helped us clean up and brought food, but the whole day was just a damn fever dream. The last 9 months have felt like years. Someone run into a gigantic fire on purpose. Burning Man 2017. My friends were gathered along with about 50,000 other people in a huge circle around the man, a 50-ish foot wooden man figure set within a large wooden pavilion that served as the central point in festival's layout. It was the night of the man burn, when the structure is set ablaze with a fireworks show and ultimately a fire as part of the ending ritual of the festival. The whole crowd was set back a few hundred yards from the fire, with 2 perimeters of security guards in between. We were watching the fire really pick up momentum, and all of a sudden a tall, athletic man standing about 10 yards from us started bolting towards the fire. He zigzagged around the security personnel, and at first everyone thought he was just being an idiot and would turn back. But after he passed the innermost security and then kept running to the fire, I got a terrible sinking feeling. Even 100 yards out, the air must have been so incredibly hot that this person was surely burning. This was no stunt. Eventually he ran right up to the fire and dove headfirst into it. There was a huge gasp in the crowd. Nobody could believe their eyes. I quickly gathered our friends in a huddle and we just hugged. That was a nightmarish experience. I think the time I crossed paths with the biggest black bear I've ever seen while hiking, I could feel every step that thing took. We just stared at each other for a minute and I slowly pulled out my knife for all the good that would have done me, lol. Thankfully, after about 10 seconds, it just moved on and I remembered to breathe. My dad is a former heroin addict. I once had to pull him out of a West Baltimore heroin den. As soon as I pulled up, I had people on each corner of the block watching me. I knew right away, even driving in, my life was in danger. When I got to the house, I told them I got a call from my dad and I was just picking him up. They flashed 2 guns at me and let me in, escorting me the whole way. They were cool about it, but I realized one wrong move and I was getting clipped without a second thought. Anyways, my dad's clean now, but we don't speak because he won't apologize for things like that. Oh well, I'm glad he's alive, I guess. Working what seemed like ground zero of a small standalone hospital, they couldn't call up satellite locations for supplies when COVID just kicked off in February. There weren't enough N95s for everyone. Then we ran out of room in the morgue, which only had 3 slots for bodies. The hospital had to get a freezer thing of what you could see in restaurants to store the extra dead bodies. We ran out of gurneys, so dead patients were put into a body bag and put right on the ground. That still F's me up. I was 18 years old and following a friend home from a party. We'd all been drinking, but he definitely shouldn't have been anywhere near a vehicle with much he had. He got violent when we tried to take his keys, so at the behest of my girlfriend, we left the party early to follow him home. About 1.5 miles from his house, he sped up and drove right into a cliff face when he failed to hold the turn. We stopped, I got out, and I told my girlfriend to drive my car to the nearest gas station and call for help. This was pre-cell phone. I walked up to the car, and he was basically cut in half inside the vehicle and pinned by the steering column. The entire interior looked like a blood bomb exploded inside of it. He was still alive. I held his hand and told him his mom was on her way. I just kept telling him he'd be okay until he passed out. It was only a couple of minutes, but it felt like an hour. I went fetal as soon as he closed his eyes. First of 2 death rattles I've heard. I didn't stop crying for almost a week. I was a mess. So, if you know someone who insists on driving drunk and wants to fight over it, fight over it. It's better to have a pissed off friend who never talks to you again than a dead one. Pin them down if you can. Almost 25 years later and I'm still left up over it. Hospice nurse here, so a lot of odd, scary stuff, but the worst has to be a 35-year-old man with a burst stomach ulcer projectile vomiting blood. The man was violent and an asshole to his wife and kids on top of drinking away all their money. But damn, I've never seen a very hardened grown man get frightened quite as quickly as he did. In between vomiting blood so hard that you could see the muscles around his ribs contracting, he reached out his hand and just said, "Please," asking me to hold it. I did hold his hand as he proceeded to fill 2 full-size trash cans with blood he vomited up. If anyone reading this drinks a lot, this is your warning to moderate your alcohol intake. Nobody deserves to die the way this man did. A woman trapped in a burning car. Her door was crumbled and she was pinned inside. They needed the jaws of life to get her out, and it just took too long to get there. It was too hot to approach. I watched her burn to death, heard her horrific, desperate screams, smelled her skin and hair cooking. It still haunts me nearly 40 years later. My father was a firefighter. I was with him out shopping when the call came in, and we were close. So we went right to the scene to meet up with the fire crew when they arrived, but we were just in his pickup truck. No pumps, no hose, no tools to open a hydrant. And the engine got there about 4 minutes too late to save the woman. Fire's a monster. It eats you alive. It's unrelenting, unfeeling, and unless you have the proper equipment, unstoppable. I've been extremely cautious in regards to fire ever since that day. I worked in animal testing for pharmaceuticals. Worst job ever, by the way. I don't recommend it. No matter how much you want to help give enrichment to the animals and make their lives as good as you can before they die, no matter how good the pay and benefits are, it will either kill your soul or make you so desensitized to suffering. Some of the drugs tested were cancer drugs. They are by far the worst because they always have major side effects. When dosing a dog one day, I noticed a foul smell coming from his mouth. Looked in, and at the back of the mouth at the gum line, it was all bloody and rotting away. Multiple dogs had this. We were not allowed to stop dosing them right away. They always dragged their feet when the animals started suffering because they get paid big bucks to test these drugs. The rotting mouths were just the worst thing I've ever seen, but I might be biased because any injury involving the mouth is just disturbing to me. Though there are many other things that come close to that situation. And we were supposed to be one of the better laboratories for animal welfare in the country. I'd be scared to see what the animals go through at other testing facilities. 3 things. One was my mom almost being murdered when I was 8 to 9 years old and me covered in her blood. 2 was not only being abused at an early age, but the memories. Now the memories are the worst because it not only happens to you once, it happens to you every day for the rest of your life through your memories. 3 was seeing my abuser again. I just turned him in, and I know or think I'll have to see him again when that is the last thing I wanted. But I will do what I've always done and stay strong. Last week I came back home from Russia, driving through Poland on the highway. Haven't slept in 36 hours, I think, but was taking turns driving with my mom and brother. At some point, I saw two red lights high up in the air, kind of like eyes. I focused at it for just a second and suddenly saw a giant creature on two legs, glowing eyes walking through the mountains. Looked away for a second and then again. What I saw were two towers, probably radio towers. The scary part was driving 140 kilometers per hour and suddenly hallucinating with my family in the car. I drove to the next rest stop and we switched drivers, but I didn't tell anyone. Lots of things. It was hard to choose until recently. There was a time a cop held me at gunpoint playing with the trigger. The one that takes the cake, though, is when my son's heart rate crashed during labor and my wife was rushed into an emergency C-section. It was so fast. One moment everything's fine and we're resting at 3 a.m. The next thing all the lights are on. There are nearly a dozen nurses in the room rushing her out, and all I'm told is to wait until someone comes to get me. It was a good 15 plus minutes until I saw my wife again, but it felt like hours. I was so afraid that I was going to lose my son before I ever met him, that something would happen to my wife during the surgery. Eventually, they let me know that his heart rate had come back up enough that I could go into the OR, and they brought me in. Everything went smoothly after that, but for a moment, I thought I could be losing my entire family just as it was beginning. Giving birth is incredibly dangerous, and our state is the worst in the US for maternal mortality. Women put their lives on the line just to become mothers. When I was 11 or so, my uncle attacked my mom. My dad was dropping me off and my mom just got home from work. As we were walking, we hear super loud music and the house is shaking. My uncle was drunk and listening to music super loud. My mom asked him to turn it down, and he took that shit personal and started hitting her. I ran out of the house screaming. My dad was in his car with my sister pulling away, but saw or heard me. He stopped the car and ran inside. I followed. My dad was 5'6" and like 130 pounds. My uncle was 6'5" and a former military police officer. My dad hit him once, and then he crumpled to the floor. My dad got me and my mom out, then was heading back in, but my mom begged him not to hurt my uncle. We called the police, and they showed up pretty quick, as we lived close to the police station. They went into the house to get him. There was a lot of yelling. When they came out, my uncle had a big cut on his chin in front of where my dad was hitting him, and he was yelling that he was going to kill all of us. The cops went in just as he was on his way out of the kitchen with a knife to come kill us. A few years later, my uncle overdosed behind a dumpster and wasn't found for a few days. My dad died in 2012 and was in hospice before dying, and he confessed a bunch of shit. He was a massive asshole my whole life, and he confessed to a bunch of shitty things to me because he didn't want to die without confessing it all. One of the things he confessed was selling my uncle bad drugs, which is what killed him. He said he was proud of that one. He also confessed to killing people while in prison. He said he liked to kill black people, but he didn't call them black people. Like I said, he was a piece of shit. Nobody in my family knows he confessed any of this stuff to me. He was nicer to my sisters and my brother than he was to me. I think him telling me everything was just one of the last mean things he could do to me. He didn't like me much because there was a chance I wasn't his kid, and I didn't look like him at all, but my other siblings did. Got an ancestry thing done a couple years ago and found out he was for sure my biological dad. Also found out that I'm 25% Jewish from his side, which means he was half Jewish, and he had Nazi tattoos. I would have loved to be the one to tell him he was Jewish just to see the look on his face.